Update now on a developing story out of Ferguson, Missouri. A spokesperson with the St. Louis County Police Department there saying 2 FBI agents were shot early this morning. Now, this happened while responding to a person barricaded inside a home. Unclear currently whether or not this was related to the Ferguson protests. However, we will keep you posted on that. And 44 protesters have been arrested after a second straight night now of violent protests. Rioters vandalized businesses and even flipped over a police car, lit it on fire as well. Protesters also threw rocks and bottles at police officers. Police were able to seize a Molotov cocktail in front of a city hall, along with bottles filled with water and urine. Authorities now defending their response, saying they're doing the best job they can under the circumstances, but the Ferguson mayor criticizing the delay in deploying National Guard troops, saying they were not sent in enough time to save their businesses. And the man at the center of the whole thing finally speaking out publicly. Officer Darren Wilson, the man who shot and killed Michael Brown last August, relived that deadly encounter as he spoke with ABC News' George Stephanopoulos. Officer Wilson went into detail about what exactly led to what has now become a national controversy.
I take it out and I come up, I pointed at him. And when I said, get back or I'm going to shoot you. And then his response, immediately, he grabbed the top of my gun. And when he grabbed it, he said, you're too much of a to shoot me. And while he's doing that, I can feel his hand trying to come over my hand and get inside the trigger guard and try and shoot me with my own gun. And that's when I pulled the trigger for the first time.
Officer Wilson went on to say that he felt that Brown was leaning toward him, tackling him and causing him harm when he continued to approach him.
Thousands of people across the U.S. supporting the people of Ferguson by taking to the streets for demonstrations. In New York, hundreds of people gathered for the second straight night in Times Square, some temporarily blocking access to the Lincoln and Midtown tunnels. In Chicago, dozens of demonstrators staged a sit-in inside City Hall. University of North Carolina campus there, students took part in what they called a die-in. They laid on the ground for 4.5 minutes, symbolizing the 4.5 hours that Brown laid on the ground after being shot to death by Officer Wilson. Now, here in the Carolinas, I mentioned this, Charlotte NAACP members say the momentum and energy that has been certainly ignited since Monday's announcement should be used to address police brutality, racial profiling, and social injustice. About 50 community members were part of a community rally in North Charlotte Tuesday night to discuss the necessary steps they need to take to move forward. A representative from the Charlotte chapter saying that while they're deeply disappointed by the decision, it's time to begin moving forward. And dozens of folks gathered for a peaceful protest at Marshall Park in uptown Charlotte Tuesday afternoon, organized by Ignite North Carolina. It's a youth-led activist group that focuses on issues affecting today's youth. Organizers say it's vital to show solidarity with the Ferguson community. They also want to raise awareness that police brutality is an issue in communities across the nation.
Well, a lot of questions still surround the grand jury's decision in this case. So here to explain the grand jury process and what steps the Brown family can now take moving forward, attorney Matt Fleischman. Matt, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So let's start there. Moving forward now, the Brown family has some options. What are they?
The Brown family can file a civil lawsuit. That's an option they've always had, and at this point, it probably is going to be expedited where they'll file it sooner rather than later.
So the civil, it's always an option on the table, regardless of the grand jury, deciding they're not going to indict the officer. Let's go to the grand jury, because a lot of people still have questions about how that whole process operates. They took a lot of time to look at this evidence. Is that standard procedure to have that much time taken to review a case?
No, it's atypical that took that long and that many witnesses for a grand jury. Typically, grand juries meet for much less time and actually go over many cases and try to decide whether there's going to be an indictment or not. So again, this was atypical. That being said, it's not that it's never happened before, and usually in high-profile cases where there's a question, it's actually not a bad idea to do this, to let the population decide, the community decide whether there should be an indictment.
So let's talk about timing there. Speaking of the other timing issue that we've been talking about all morning, and protocol here, 4 hours is the amount of time that Michael Brown's body was on the street before they were cleared, and a lot of people bring that up. Legally speaking, is that something that, they've got to cover their bases, of course, but is that unusual as well? Do you know how that type of thing typically plays out, and what steps had to be taken, why that would have been necessary?
In terms of from the police point of view, might it be just gathering evidence, the investigation after a shooting? In a civil case, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference because the excessive force occurred before that. So certainly if you're the plaintiff, you're going to try to make a big issue about a number of issues, the systemic issues with the police force, problems in the community, Michael Brown lying in the street for 4+ hours after the shooting. But the defense is going to argue all of these things are irrelevant and have nothing to do with whether there's an excessive force by the officer.
Right. What is so? What defines excessive force? You notice what 10 shots here. You know, but Officer Wilson in the interview with ABC News saying, "Hey, I felt threatened, and therefore I discharged my weapon 10 times."
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's going to be basically whether his use of force was reasonable based on the situation. So he's going to be able to tell his story. The defense will put on a bunch of evidence, forensic evidence, evidence found at the scene, blood spatters, bullet casings, et cetera, and then the jury would decide whether the force was excessive or reasonable. I mean, the defense that he's using is an affirmative defense. It's I was trying to defend myself. I thought I was going to be killed. Okay, that's an affirmative defense. That's a defense that has to be proven by the defendant. So it's a little unusual in this situation where that was brought up by the defense in the grand jury. Okay. That's usually something that's decided by a criminal jury, whether that is an affirmative defense that's going to be bought by the jury. In this situation, the grand jury decided to basically accept that defense and say that there was no probable cause.
Matt Fleischman, thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
Great insight. Okay, continuing along here on this Wednesday as the Union County Board of Education calling